All right, guys, welcome back. My Classic Fords. So we're going a little further on the sills here on the Focus. I'll show you kind of where I'm at. So yesterday we cut them all off, cut the rusty sections off, and we cleaned it up a little bit. So as you see, the sill has been removed. Underneath here, what I've done was this is like your structure of your car here. Like this would be like considered like your frame, so to speak. So this was rotten here, so I cut it off back where it was half decent. You can see where this sill was caked right full of mud and salt and dirt. What we're gonna have to do, this is the floor of the car. Right here's basically the carpet right here. When you're working in here, if you're gonna start welding, doing a lot of heat work here, welding along here, make sure you remove your carpet. You will light your car on fire. And then it won't be worth fixing anyway. So maybe that'll be easier. So what we're gonna do here tonight is, like I said, I cut this off just to get it out of my way. It was rotten anyway, pretty near fell off. As you see along here, we're gonna end up doing the same thing. There's no sense of this rusty stuff being here. We'll just zip it off so it's out of our way. I went back to here, found some half decent steel. I zip cut all along here, removing the inner lip of the sill. So originally this come out like this and down. And that's, well, as you see right there, that's kind of how it used to be. It used to come out and down. And then this factory sill would kind of pinch weld right here. So we removed that. And I have a sill tonight that we're gonna try to put on and just have a look to see kind of where it lands. And I'm thinking what we might do is slide a square tube up in here and weld it to the sill and try to weld it to the car, give it a little bit of strength back, as well as fix the sill. All right, so the next step, we'll finish cutting all this crud off of here, try to get it all back to this, and we'll have a look at it then. Okay, so what we're looking at now, after all the stuff was kind of cut out, I kind of squared that seam off. You know, I got a pretty good idea what I'm doing now. And I mean, that is kind of the first step. You got to get it in your head, kind of what you're up to. So, I had a buddy of mine there bent up these sills for me. You could buy them, yes. But for me, it was a whole lot cheaper and easier just to have them bent. And I think it would be for most people. You could buy a whole sheet of steel for about the same price as the sills, so you get a lot of extra body metal. What I did here, I marked this little mark here, just showing that's where the sill starts to kind of sweep out. So we're not going to worry about this section yet. We're going to get the straight section on. So I've already measured that. It was 58 inches from the front here, straight back to here, and I already cut it. So that's the piece that I cut. I had them made up at 8 feet long, just so I had lots of extra material. So we'll hold that up there and see what it looks like. Okay, so this is the straight section of sill. Like I said, it's going from here to that mark. We're just gonna hold it up just to see if they're anywhere close to what we need. Okay, they don't look too bad. So it looks kind of like if we were to tack it on up like that, it would actually match up pretty well. Might need to roll in just a little bit, but that's okay. So I think we'll start just by kind of tacking it. We'll tack it along the top and see what we got from there. this is where it's always nice to have, you know, an extra set of hands, but I don't, so we're going to make do with what I got. Just have to struggle a little bit. So I know roughly where I want it. I'm just going to have a look to see how it's going to fit. And it looks like right here needs a little trim. Not happy the way that's sitting. Just this piece here, it's kind of stuck down a little bit. It was making a big gap. Didn't like it. Fits a little better now. Okay, let me go ahead and give it a couple little tacks. You want to try and get it on there straight. I'm just going by the line that I cut off. I'm hoping it's relatively straight. And I'm just putting small little tacks on it. I want to have a look at it, see kind of what it looks like before I get too crazy. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention too, make sure you have hooked the battery in your car, which I did already, especially newer vehicles. And by newer, I mean I usually work with stuff that's, you know, 50s, 60s. That stuff's not quite as important. But these certainly are. Okay, so now that we've got this tacked on, I mean, we can manipulate this a little bit. We can bang this around. We can close that gap. That's okay. This was pretty good along here. This is pretty much weldable from here to here. We know this whole section, we need to build that. Is what it is. You can see here it's not fitting the way it should. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but I'll bring it over. Back here looks pretty reasonable. All along there I think will do. So we'll probably just try to hold that up and get maybe a clamp on it or a tack on it wherever we can. Just to kind of hold it in shape. I think first I'll go along, maybe tack that. Okay, I think my welder's set a little too high. Well, this light gauge stuff, I mean, my sills are pretty heavy duty. They're 18 gauge. The car is probably 20 at the heaviest, probably 22. I know the slip-on sills that were put on the car before that I'm currently welding to are probably really thin, probably 22 gauge. You gotta have your machine set pretty low, kind of like snow cone low. All right, so now that I've got that kind of tacked on, we're going to have a look at the front. Okay, so you can see that it's definitely not fitting properly. It's closer than you think. You can see here that it's not on the right angle. It needs to be cut this way, which is fine. That's kind of why I just let it overlap some. And that's why it's also not fitting right, is because we need to cut this, kind of fold it in. I'm gonna mark this and cut it. just so, because if I push it in right now, it's gonna hit the fender. So we're gonna just mark this here. Okay, so that'll follow the fender, and then we want to just cut it off relatively straight, something like that. Start with that. We can always take a little more off if we have to. Okay, so you see I kind of just zipped that off, and it's actually square cut underneath. And just by doing that little cut, you can see how far out of whack it is. And just with one finger, I can hold this up into place where it needs to go. And you can see that it actually fits reasonably well. This body line here, yes, is a little off. If we put a little filler on, we could probably taper that in a little bit. You know, you could beat that in a little bit, fill over top if you wanted to. If I was real worried about it, you know, we wouldn't have just bent up a set of tin sills to put on it. But just doing that little bit there brings that right into where it's got to be. So we still have to do the same thing up there, just kind of hold it in. But now this is held in. I'll probably tack it in there. And then we'll start going along the bottom, see what we got to tack it to. And then we'll have a look up in the door. All right, so here's what the door opened. I got that tacked in. As you see, like I said, this body line here isn't quite right, but hey, that's fine. We'll make do. If you look down it, this is pretty near perfect. Underneath's not too bad. You have to remember, you know, this car is 6 inches off the ground. You know, who's gonna see it? Who's gonna care? It's a 2009 Focus. We're trying to get by for a couple years. So, got a couple tacks on that, and as you see, that's in there pretty decent. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of see what I can do for welding here. I think it'll be a little easier to weld it from the inside. So we'll do that. We need to weld this seam, weld for all along here. And underneath here, I gotta see what I can kind of wrap this under to tack it to. So we'll get to that in a minute. So right now, I'll do a little bit of welding in there. All right, so I got a couple little stitch welds on there. Okay. I got some weld down in there, super hard to reach, kind of not very pretty, but I mean, it's welded somewhat decent anyway. Underneath here, when you get down and look, how straight do we look? I'd say pretty reasonable. So I'm hoping I can fit like a square tube up inside of here and weld it to this, and then weld it to the car. It's kind of what I'm hoping. If I can, that would fill the void, as well as making the car, you know, structurally better, if nothing else. So we have that little piece left to tackle, and we've got this mess left to tackle. So I'm gonna go I have this little piece bent, if you remember from the video last night. So I got this little piece bent. So I'm gonna measure this, see how long it needs to be, cut it, and lay it in, see what it looks like. Okay, so I went and cut this little piece of metal that goes in here. We'll have to have a pretty close look at it, see here how it fits. So we got a couple options. We can butt weld it, put it like that. I'll have to zip cut it all down, zip cut this section down, you know, to match this up. Up here, same thing. I mean, we can put it in here, butt weld it. I'm looking at maybe slipping it up under, kind of something like this. If it's slipped up under, I only need to cut one side off. I did notice right here, I don't know how well you can see it, but this sill's a little too high here. So when we close the door, and we look, the door gap looks all pretty good, except for when it gets to the very front. It looks a little thin. My guess is the factory sill just kind of shrinks in the front a little bit. The sill we bent is, you know, perfectly straight. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to kind of scribe along the top here, buzz a little bit off, and then we'll throw this patch on top and see what it looks like. And as you see here, I got that black line on here. I just kind of scribed it along there so that the door gap was pretty much the same all the way up. Now I'm just going to zip cut it off. What I've done now is I scribed that line across and zip cut it down, and I just recessed it a little bit so this would sit on top of the sill and it would be flush with here. And the reason I'm going to do that is it'll be easier to trim the bottom lip off. I'll show you what I mean. So I set this in here like that and get it lined up with the edge of the sill. I'm doing this one hand, so sorry. So I get this lined up the sill, and I'll get it tacked in here, and then I'll kind of show you what I'm up to. Okay, so I just put a couple little tacks on here, and as you see how much is hanging off here, that's fine. That's very easy. We'll just take maybe even a sanding pad, and we'll just burn that back like that with the grinder, and we'll follow suit to the sill. Because as you see up here, the sill is out flush. Okay, so just the shape of the car, you know, this piece here I had bent up for the largest section, like I said the other night, and then it gets smaller back here, and it's easy. We just trim that off. We'll pull this out and tack it so that it's flush. And up here I'll do the same thing. I'll pull it back up underneath this so that it's flush, and we'll tack it in. I'm just trying to give you an idea what I'm up to. I'm just pulling this out with the screwdriver just ever so gently, just to make this flush back here, and then I'm going to tack it. So I'm going to pull it out past to make the top corner flush, and then I'm going to let it go to make back by the screwdriver flush. And just like that. So now this is flush, this is flush, this is flush here, our seam lines up, and we'll just brush that off with a grinder. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to pull this back flush and get it welded back in. Might have a little bit of a gap here. You might have to stick a, you know, I don't know, a little coat hanger or something in there just to fill the gap. But I'll tack this a little stronger, and then we'll slowly work this out and tack it on. Okay, so what I done now, that gap wasn't actually that bad. Once I pulled this out, this actually tacked reasonably well. I could have pulled this down to make it touch, but I wanted to leave that at the correct location. Right here, it's a little bit under. It's hard to see on the camera. It's not very much, but it's just under a bit there. And I'm going to leave that rather than try to risk pulling this out and pucker it. If we have to, we can take just a skim of body fill and put over top, and it'll be good enough. This is that's for your door rubber to seal on, so it needs to be pretty good. But like I said, I don't want to risk pulling that out. If you do pull it out too far, then your door don't shut correctly. So I'd rather just do it with body fill if we have to. Might not be that bad. So as you see, I've got that tacked. I've got this piece tacked in. Now we're going to buzz this off. I'm probably just going to use one of these pads here, and we'll just kind of take the grinder and hold it flat and sand it off. And then we can go along and stitch this seam up. Okay, so I got that sanded off. As you can see, it's now flush. And as you can see, this gets wider at the front and starts to narrow back. That's why I had that piece bent that way. As you see, I just sanded this off flush. I just barely hit the sill. You don't want to hit it too much. You don't need to make it any thinner than it is. Now that's a butt weld. Now I can go right along, fill that seam with weld, and then grind it off, and it'll be this will be all one piece again. And then we'll put that piece in next. All right, so this is what I got done now. I got the seams welded up completely. So basically from the front of the rear door to the front wheel is welded, except for the bottom, of course. We're going to tackle that maybe tomorrow if we have time. There is a spot up here. There's a little hole here. Just where I kind of got at it with the zip cut, trying to get in between the door here. There's a great big gob of insulation and seam sealer in there. The whole time I was welding this area, there was a little gap here. As you can tell, I had to jump back and forth. It kept catching on fire. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna put seam sealer back in this hole. Just to try to keep, you know, any water from getting in there. The seam sealer is right there. Like you can, that's why it's black. Like, that's not just a void, that's right full of some sort of, you know, foam. And I just don't want to light the car on fire. I'm looking up in there now. I don't see any flames anymore. I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't think the gain is really all that much. So I think I'll just seam seal it, and then I'll fiberglass over it, and we'll just, you know, we'll hope for the best. If that lets water in, well, it is what it is. I think maybe we should drill some holes in the bottom of the sill. That way we can get up underneath it and keep undercoating it as best as we can, especially where this is all fresh bare metal. Anywhere you weld it, it will rot first. So any seam that you weld, I mean, that's just a no-brainer. Okay, so I'm gonna go cut the piece for here. It's just a regular rectangle. Just need to cut it out and tack it in. So we'll do that now. Okay, so I cut that patch out. I cut it out just a hair big. I laid it in the hole. I kind of pushed up underneath. I scribed it with a marker. And a little bit of a gap there, but I mean, everywhere else, I got a nice tight fit seam. That's what I'm after. Along here, I just let it overhang. I just ground it again. Just moved it back. A little bit of a gap there. I might be able to cut that tack and just give that a smack and push it down. So I'll weld that up. And that should be about the majority of the sill done, except for this back piece. It's not a very big piece, but this little part here can be very tricky and time consuming because it does have multiple bends in it. So we'll try and tackle that next video, tackle that piece, show you how I do it. And we'll try and get that piece underneath and close the bottom of the sill in. All right, now weld that little piece up and go from there. All right, guys. So now that the sill is completely welded, I have everything welded right back to this front of the rear door. So I'm gonna call that good. Now, tomorrow we'll be working on that section. So we'll weld that seam, we'll build that corner, and hopefully we can do underneath tomorrow. It depends on what kind of time I have. Then we'll just, we'll grind this off and see what it looks like. Okay, I figured I'd give it a quick clean, just to kind of show you what it would look like. Again, like, and we're not going for super high quality. We're just going for, you know, solid. So I didn't grind all the weld off. You know, I left some weld on. You can see it all along here. These joints here were butt welded, so I mean, that's all weld there. But I left some weld there just as support, some there. You don't need to grind it right off as long as it's flat enough. We can put a little fiberglass on it. Essentially, that's what it looks like. So I'm gonna say from here up, I'm gonna call it done, with the exception of the piece underneath. That's kind of what we're going for. And I mean, she's a lot better than it was yesterday, that's for sure. Again, you know, this is a 2009 Focus. We're trying to get a couple more years out of it. We're not trying to go for car show quality or anything like that. This is just something that you could do yourself. So, tomorrow night, if I get the time, it might be the night after, we'll see. I'm gonna tackle that piece and see if we can get that welded up, and then we'll have a look underneath the sill and we'll have a look at how we're gonna close this in. So, for now, like always, thank you very much for watching. If you want to see more stuff like this, you know, please subscribe, hit the like button if you like it, and yeah, come back again. Thanks a lot.